Hello, welcome to the Jake Morrison Show. I am your host, Jake Morrison, alongside Chuck Swirsky. Thank you so much for coming to the show here today, Chuck. Chuck, you've done a lot in the sports broadcasting world, Raptors, Bulls, but it's great that you're able to come here and talk to me today.
Well, Jake, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
All right, Chuck, let's get started. What made you want to become a sports broadcaster at whatever age that you decided that that's what you wanted to be?
Great question. Well, number one, I was a horrible athlete. Even as a kid, I was slow, I was short, I was uncoordinated. And, those are three bad elements if you want to move on in the athletic world. But I love sports. I love to play on the driveway. We had a cul-de-sac near where I lived. We'd play wiffle ball. We'd play football. It was great. We would go to the park and play all day during the summer. But I also realized that that was going to be it. And I always, in those days, there was no internet. I know I'm dating myself, but there was no internet. There were no cell phones. We had one game of the week in Major League Baseball. NBC would televise it on a Saturday afternoon. The NBA was basically an afterthought. No one really cared about the NBA. ABC had a package. It was one national game a week on a Sunday, and they would always show Boston, Philadelphia, or New York. And then basically the NFL, in Seattle, we didn't have an NFL team when I grew up as a kid. So we would get a lot of LA Rams, San Francisco 49ers, some in the old days, the American Football League with the Oakland Raiders, the San Diego Chargers, Kansas City Chiefs. So that was my world, and I just absorbed it. And I love talking sports. And so the first break I ever got was when I was 12 years young. I walked into the local radio station, and the call letters were KFKF, and Jake had stood for Kemper Freeman and his wife, Catherine Freeman, KFKF, if you're following me. And I walked in, 12 years old. I walked into the radio station. The receptionist is there sitting behind a desk. And I said, my name is Charlie Swirsky. I didn't go by Chuck until college. That's another story. I said, my name's Charlie Swirsky. I want to be a sportscaster. I'd like to apply for a job. And the receptionist looked at me like I had a third eye. And she goes, well, you're a little young, but why don't you come back in a few years? And while she's talking to me, the sports director is overhearing this conversation. He walks behind her in the front of the office and says, young man, come with me. I go into the office, and it wasn't his office. There were like two or three other people in the office. And he sits me down and says, tell me about yourself. Tell me what's going on. And I told him, he goes, why don't you, on Friday nights during the high school football season, why don't you keep stats for me? Can you get to high school games? Now, my dad had passed away a year before. So I asked my mom, Mom, can you please take me on a Friday night? Can you drop me off? And the region where we had high school games, anywhere between maybe 2 miles to about 7 miles. There were probably about 2 or 3 high schools in the area, 4 high schools. And so it was the game of the week, the King County Conference game of the week. And so I would keep stats. Well, when it turned into basketball, I'll never forget, I was 14 years old, and at halftime of a game between Interlake and Mercer Island, the school, by the way, Mercer Island, produced a lot of terrific players, including Quinn Snyder, now the head coach of the Atlanta Hawks. And so we're at halftime, and I give Bill O'Mara, the sports director, stats. And I had, I would circle field goals. I would have like 11 points. There were no 3-point shooting in those days. So and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he says, and with halftime stats, let's turn it over to Charlie Swirsky. And there was this pause, and I'm looking around. I pointed to my chest, and I said, "Me?" And he goes, "Let's try that again, Charlie. What's going on with the stats?" And I took the mic, and boom, it was like adrenaline that I had never felt before.
That's an awesome story about how you wanted to get into this business. Um, Fast forward some time after that. How did you get into WGN and start your radio broadcasting journey?
Okay, well, so I graduated from Ohio University, and I was applying for jobs. And this is a life lesson for all of us about perseverance, because we're going to hear no a lot of times. I know I heard it. Everyone's going to hear it. And it's how you respond to the word no. So I heard a lot of no's, but I got two internships, one in Cleveland and one in Seattle, my hometown. And so after my internship expired in Seattle, I was applying everywhere, and I got a job in Columbus, Ohio. And here's how things work. When I was a kid, I would spend the summers with a sportscaster and his family in Baltimore that my uncle knew. And so while I was a kid spending summers in Baltimore, I would meet a lot of people through the sportscaster, Vince Bagley. One of the individuals that I was introduced to who kept a running correspondence with me, his name was Ernie Harwell, a legendary Detroit Tigers broadcaster. And at the end of our sit down, Jake, you can Google him. Your listeners and viewers can Google him. He had a magnificent Hall of Fame career, one of the greatest baseball broadcasters ever. So here's how the life and journey work. So here I am. I'm trying for a job. I send my tape. In those days, again, no internet. I can't send links as is the case now. I send a cassette tape in a puffed up bubbled envelope, mail it to Columbus, Ohio. And, he hears the interview and he goes, "Well, we've got 3 or 4 candidates." And he goes, "I'll get back to you." Well, I decided I'm going to have Ernie call him. And, out of the blue, Ernie says, "I'd love to help." He calls this program director of the radio station. The program director of the radio station grew up in Detroit, and his hero was Ernie Harwell. So
Ah,
think about this. This is how the story went down from what I was told. His name was George Yoakum. He's sitting behind a desk. His secretary calls on the intercom and says, "George, I've got an Ernie Harwell on the phone. He'd like to talk to you." And George Yoakum hits the button to his secretary and says, "I'm sorry, who's on the line?" And she goes, "Ernie Harwell of the Detroit Tigers." He said, "Put him on immediately." He picks up the phone and says, "Is this Ernie Harwell?" And Ernie says, "Yes." And he goes, "What can I do for you? I grew up in Detroit. I loved you." And he goes, "I'm calling on behalf of Chuck Swirsky. And I understand he interviewed with you." And he goes, "Yeah, Chuck is looking for the job here. He has a nice tape. We're looking at other people." And Ernie just rolled out the red carpet for me. And I got hired. And that
I,
started it off. I was only there for 6 months. An executive search firm brought me to Chicago. I worked at 2 stations before I went to WGN. But without those contacts and networking, I mean, I don't know if I'd be here talking to you, Jake.
that's awesome. Again, these stories are just all amazing. You worked with the Bulls for obviously a long time, multiple stints. What was it like during the Jordan era of basketball to work with the Bulls?
Well, I covered the Bulls during the Jordan era. I was not their play-by-play
Yeah, yeah.
man.
Yeah, I know you covered them.
The first year of play-by-play with the Bulls was Derrick Rose rookie year. But prior to that, I was here for the first three-peat. And then I left in 94 to do the University of Michigan. I was at the tail end of the Fab Five. and then the next class with Tractor Trailer and Maceo Bastin and Maurice Taylor and that group. But I'll tell you what, when Jordan was a magnificent talent, but he needed help, and he got help. And Jerry Krause put a team around him. He built a team around Michael Jordan. And the whole key was Scottie Pippen. And Scottie Pippen, without any doubt, one of the greatest two-way players in the history of this sport. Bill Cartwright fit in extremely well. And then all of a sudden you put Horace Grant and all these satellite players. John Paxson knew his role, tough, hard-nosed, competitive each and every night, and so when they were in these battles, these playoff battles with New York and Detroit and Cleveland back in the day, these teams were ready. And the Bulls with Phil Jackson, they would go into a game and they had already won the game without even playing because of the mental capabilities they had. And I mean, listen, there were some really good teams during that era. And one of the best teams never to reach the finals during that period of time were the Cavaliers. Cleveland had a really good ball club, and they just couldn't bust the door down against the Bulls. And if you look at the Knicks, how'd the Knicks go to the finals without Jordan? And once the Bulls beat Detroit, the Pistons were at the end of their run. They were on the back burner. But it was a great era of basketball. And we'll probably never see that again because there's only one Michael Jordan.
Yeah, Michael Jordan, one of the best players of all time. It's awesome that you were able to work around him during those years of your career. But after in 1998, you went to be the sport broadcaster of the Toronto Raptors. What was the biggest change teams, cities, and even countries when it comes to going to Toronto to work for the Raptors?
You know what, Jake? Another great question. So I always wanted to get into the NBA. That was my goal as a kid, even when the NBA wasn't the NBA. Okay. So I came up short for a couple of jobs. And, and I'll be honest with you, I was crushed because you get right there and you don't get the job. But I'm a firm believer that God has a journey for us. And my journey was enjoy the job you're in. And that was at the University of Michigan. And I loved calling games for Michigan. I loved a big time atmosphere that Michigan presented. I loved the campus. My kids spent 4 great years there as little munchkins, running up and down in the big house in Chrysler, now Center, but at that time, Chrysler Arena. But getting the Raptors job was amazing. And one of the biggest things that challenged me, Jake, in college, there was no shot clock at the time, no shot clock whatsoever. There was no three-point shooting. And so I'm used to teams that couldn't compete with Michigan to slow the game down. And we would have some low-scoring games. Well, all of a sudden, I get this NBA job, and it's one thing, Jake, to watch an NBA game. It's another to call it because it's fast. They get that ball over the midcourt line in 2 seconds, and you've got to be on top of the play. And oh, by the way, I have an analyst sitting next to me, and I've got to make sure that the analyst can offer his opinions on what's going on. And so it was an adjustment. And to be quite candid with you, I was really bad for the first probably 20 games. I was, and I'm telling you point blank, I was horrible. And thank God that I had an understanding boss who was with me every step of the way, Nelson Millman, along with the Raptors organization. And I caught up to speed, literally and figuratively. And it was a great run. I love Toronto, and I love everything about the city and about the country.
Yeah, the Toronto Raptors, they just became a team in 95 before you started working for them in 98. So a fairly new organization when that all happened. And we're going to fast forward some more time, 2008 to the present day. What's your favorite part about working for the Bulls?
Well, my favorite part of working for the Bulls is to see our employees and how gifted they are in so many varied positions with the Bulls organization. And I have so much respect for the Reinsdorf family because they truly care about their employees. And Jerry did a fantastic job overseeing the run with Jordan. And Michael Reinsdorf, I think, showed me a lot yesterday. We're taping this, of course, with bringing in Bryson Graham, because Michael Reinsdorf is competitive. Michael Reinsdorf wants to win. And listen, you know what? At the end of the day, you either produce or you don't. And just like my job, I need to produce or I'm out of here. And, hopefully that won't happen for a while because I love my job. But the truth of the matter is, there is no entitlement. I'm not entitled to anything. I have to show up every day and I have to prove myself each and every day. So during that span, when I started 2008, watching Derrick Rose play was amazing. And before the ACL, he was arguably a top 3 player in the league and, of course, remains the youngest MVP in the NBA. So, bottom line is that era with Joakim Noah, Derrick Rose, Luol Deng, Kirk Heinrich, we could go right down the list of great players. And the unity and the chemistry on that team was unbelievable.
Yeah, again, a team that they didn't do much in the 2010s just because of the ACL injury, but a big what if in the current day sports world. One of
Yep.
your famous calls is onions, baby onions. How did that originate?
Well, and I'll tell you, Bill Raftery gets credit for that because he calls on CBS, and I love Raf. But who first came up with the word onions, I had never heard it before, was Ray Meyer. I did games with DePaul, and Ray said out of the blue one day, he has some big onions, meaning that the players stepped up. And but regardless, it's just an expression of a big moment in a big game. And I love NBA basketball. The players are so gifted and they are so skilled. And as we're watching during the playoffs, it's a completely different animal. You're going to have some blowouts in playoff games, but
Oh
for the
yeah.
most part, yeah, 38 points, in fact, with the Spurs and Minnesota. But the truth of the matter is, we've had some great, great games. And, teams shorten their rotations. They play tough defense. You can tell the officials are letting a lot of stuff go. And, they're letting them play.
Yeah, the Knicks, they had a 51-point victory and they turned it around and won another game by 39.
Yep.
It was awesome to watch those two. You already kind of mentioned this a little bit, but who has been the biggest influence that you've had on your career?
The biggest influence on my career was my mom, because I lost my dad early in my life, and my mom was always an encourager. She always told me to pursue my dreams and goals and never give up, and to stay close to God. And, one thing is that in our life, it's not a straight line in our world. We're going to have some ups, we're going to have some downs, but you have to continue, as we talked earlier, Jake, to persevere. You have to stay positive. You have to have passion for what you do. And you have to learn that, we're all in this together, right? We can't do it by ourselves. And so I'm so fortunate that I have Bill Wennington sitting next to me every game. Bill Wennington remains one of the most popular players in the modern era of Bulls basketball because he is kind and considerate to everyone. And he's not narcissistic. He doesn't have this chip on his shoulder that I'm a former NBA player. He has no entitlement, and he's a great guy. And so we have Bill and we have Alyssa, who does some pre and half and post stuff. and we have a great engineer in Rich Wyatt. So, I mean, hey, I'm very, very fortunate.
Yeah, that's awesome. I personally like to do this a lot. I show lots of emotion during games. For example, when New Trier they played against St. Pat's in the second round of the playoffs, I think that was my best game. I showed tons of emotion during that. What makes you want to show so much emotion during games?
Well, one thing is I always let the game dictate my calls. I mean, if it's a routine right-handed dunk in the middle of the second quarter, I mean, if the ball goes into the post and Leonard Miller to the rack with a right-handed dunk, and it's 20-18 Bulls by 2 with 4:18 to go first. Okay. Now, if Leonard Miller does a 360 slam dunk, that's when you know you got to bring it out. But
Yeah.
you always report what you see in front of you, and you want to be accurate. And one thing is, I always try to be fair to the opposing team. Do I want the Bulls to win, Jake? 100%. No doubt about it. But the other team deserves credit too. And when they make a big play or a key play, you got to give them credit. I mean, hey, you're not going 82-0. I can tell you that right now. And so when a team comes out and performs well and they deserve the win, as a broadcaster and communicator, I don't want to, dwell on that for minutes, but because it's never personal. But I mean, you have to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, I always try to be as neutral as possible when I'm calling games, even though it's not that easy to be as neutral as possible, especially when you're calling for like a school radio station or, in your case, an NBA team.
Yep.
So it's definitely a challenge that all broadcasters really have to face. What is the difference in preparing, since you said that you've done TV in the past? What is the difference in preparing for a TV game versus a radio game?
Absolutely nothing. And I'll tell you what, I do my own stats and my own notes. I don't have a service that provides broadcasters with information. I want to do this by myself because I learn a lot and it stays in my brain. And I've done TV with the Raptors. I did a lot of TV. I've done some fill-in work for the Bulls, but I prefer radio over
I do as
TV.
well.
I am so glad that I'm the radio broadcaster, and it affords me an opportunity to allow my creativity and for a vocabulary, and it challenges me. And plus, we can set the narrative of a game where really the truck is telling the broadcasters what to do.
Yeah, TV is definitely not as fun, I think, because radio you get to have to say everything that happens versus TV. You don't know if you're talking too much, too little. It's just a complete different ball game. What is
Correct.
your favorite call that you've ever had of all time?
Well, I mean, with the Raptors, we had a few of them with Vince Carter. I mean, Vince hit some game-winning shots that was amazing. Mo Peterson sent a game into overtime with a Hail Mary midcourt shot in a regular season game at Washington. I mean, here we had some, the Derrick Rose game winner against Cleveland where he shot it over the extended arm of Tristan Thompson. The games that we had with the Bulls and Boston, Derrick's first playoff game ever in Boston, and he was phenomenal. And then Josh Giddey with a midcourt.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
I mean, that was crazy.
Yeah, those are all insane moments. So I always like to cap off the interviews with a quick sports prediction. And so I've done this for the last two, and I'm going to do this one again here. Who do you think is going to win the NBA Finals?
I think it's going to be OKC.
Everyone's saying OKC. That is a great pick. Well, thank you so much, Chuck, for coming on to the show. Again, Chuck Swirsky, the radio voice of the Chicago Bulls. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll be back for the next episode here on the Jake Morrison Show.